Jake, a haunted tycoon, regretted abandoning his first love. Emily, his former flame, marked by pain and insecurity. Fate reunites them. Jake tries to get close, but she rebuffs him. "Stop, Jake. I'm not the same. I don't belong in your world. I never deserved you." The phrase hits him hard. He won't lose her again. With a choked voice, he drops everything to prove that she deserves him and that their love is the only thing that matters. Prepare for a twist where high society and the past will try to destroy this love, but the strength of their love can tear down all barriers. Watch this story to the end. You'll be amazed. If you like love stories, romance, subscribe to this channel. Leave your comment. We post videos like this every day. Continuing. The rain hammered against the windows of the small apartment in Queens, creating a melancholic melody that echoed Emily Carter's state of mind. Sitting at the kitchen table, she watched the raindrops trickle down the glass as she graded her 8th grade students' papers. The essays on my dreams for the future made her smile tenderly, but also stirred a pang of nostalgia for her own dreams, long buried. At 38, Emily had built a simple but dignified life. As an English teacher at PS 22, she found purpose in shaping young minds, even if the salary barely covered her expenses. The 2-bedroom apartment she shared with her younger sister Lily was modest but cozy, filled with books, plants, and photographs that told the story of 2 women who had learned to fend for themselves after their parents' untimely death. The deepest mark on her heart, however, didn't come from financial hardships or the early responsibility of caring for her sister. It was the invisible scar left by a love that had broken her soul in 16 years ago. Jake. Just thinking. The name still made her chest tighten. She had learned to live with the pain, turning it into strength to help others, but she had never managed to allow herself to love completely again. Across town, on the top floor of a mirrored skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan, Jake Sterling watched New York City stretch out before his eyes through the glass wall of his office. At 40, he had achieved everything money could buy. A tech company valued in the billions, apartments on 3 continents, luxury cars, and the respect of the New York elite. His name was splashed across the covers of business magazines, and his opinion moved markets. But on that rainy Thursday afternoon, as he signed multi-million-dollar contracts, Jake felt emptier than ever. Each professional victory was a cruel reminder that he had lost the only thing that really mattered: Emily. The name echoed in his mind like an unanswered prayer. He had tried to find her countless times over the years, hiring private investigators, but he always backed out at the last moment. How could he explain that he abandoned her at the altar of his ambition? How could he justify that he chose his family's approval and the business empire over true love? His secretary interrupted his dark thoughts. "Mr. Sterling, the foundation. Documents have arrived. The education project in underserved communities is ready for your review." Jake sighed, picking up the folder. The Sterling Foundation was his attempt to find redemption through philanthropy. Maybe by helping others, he could ease the weight of guilt he carried. His eyes scanned the list of schools benefiting from the technology modernization program. When he saw the name PS 22 Queens, something in his chest clenched. That same afternoon, Emily received a call from the school principal. "Emily, you need to come immediately. We had a problem with the library roof. The rain damaged all the new books we received from the donation." Emily rushed to the school in the storm, her heart aching as she saw her beloved library flooded. The books she had catalogued with such care floated in the dirty water, years of work destroyed in a few hours. She knelt on the wet floor, trying to save what she could, tears mingling with the rainwater that still dripped from the ceiling. It was in this moment of despair that Jake Sterling walked into the soaked library. He had decided to make a surprise. visit to the project schools, driven by a restlessness he couldn't explain. When he saw the scene of devastation, his protective instinct took over, and he approached to help. "Let me help you," he said, crouching next to the woman kneeling on the floor, not initially recognizing her because of her position and the dim lighting. Emily looked up, tears still shining in her brown eyes. The world stopped. Time froze. 16 years dissolved in an instant as their eyes met. Jake felt the air leave his lungs as if he had been punched in the stomach. There she was, more mature, with some wrinkles around her eyes that only made her more beautiful, but still his Emily. "Jake," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the rain that continued to fall through the damaged roof. The silence that followed their mutual recognition was deafening. Emily stood up quickly, wiping her wet hands on her skirt and taking a few steps back, as if Jake's proximity could burn her. He remained kneeling for a moment, absorbing every detail of her face, memorizing the changes that time had brought. "What are you doing here?" Emily's voice came out colder than she intended, an automatic defense against the pain that began to resurface in her chest. Jake stood up slowly, his hands trembling imperceptibly as he adjusted the Italian suit, now stained with dirty water. "The Sterling Foundation is funding the modernization of several public schools. This is one of them." He paused, his eyes unable to stray from her face. "Emily, I didn't know you worked here." "Of course you didn't." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "Why would you? You walked out of my life 16 years ago without looking back." The school principal, Ms. Davis, appeared in the library doorway at that moment, interrupting the electric tension that hung in the air. "Mr. Sterling, what an honor to have you here. Emily, this is our school's benefactor, businessman Jake Sterling." Emily forced a professional smile. "We've met Ms. Davis a long time ago." Her voice maintained a neutral tone, but Jake could see the storm in her eyes. "What a wonderful coincidence," exclaimed Ms. Davis, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Carter is our treasure here. She's transformed our library into a true cultural center for the community." Jake watched Emily blush slightly at the compliment and felt his heart race to see that she was still capable of the genuine sweetness that had always captivated him. "That doesn't surprise me. Emily always had a gift for transforming everything around her into something special." The comment caught her off guard, and for a moment her defenses faltered, but she quickly composed herself. "Ms. Davis, we need to talk about the repairs to the roof. This library can't stay like this." "About that," Jake interjected, "I'd like to discuss a more permanent solution. I can finance not only the repairs, but a complete renovation of the library, with an anti-theft system, air conditioning, and new computers." Emily stared at him suspiciously. "Why? Why this school in particular?" "Because," Jake hesitated, feeling the weight of her gaze, "because I believe in education as a tool for social transformation." "How noble," she retorted, the irony evident. "The great businessman has discovered philanthropy." Ms. Davis, still oblivious to the tension, clapped her hands excitedly. "Ms. Carter, what a blessing! Could you coordinate the project? You know every corner of this library better than anyone." "I don't think that's a good idea," Emily replied quickly, but Jake interrupted her. "I insist. I want it to be you." Their eyes met again, and this time he didn't look away. "It needs to be you, Emily." The way he said her name, laden with a pain she recognized as mirroring her own, made her heart skip a beat. But she couldn't allow herself that weakness. Not again. "I have to go," she murmured, grabbing her purse and heading for the door. "Emily, wait." Jake took a few steps toward her, but stopped when she turned, her eyes shining with suppressed tears. "No, Jake, just no. You can't just waltz back into my life after all these years and act like nothing happened. You made your choice a long time ago." "I was young and stupid. I let external influences—" "Stop!" She held up her hand, interrupting him. "I don't want to hear your justifications. Not now, not ever." Jake felt despair growing in his chest. "The library project, will you coordinate it?" Emily hesitated at the door, struggling with herself. The school desperately needed the renovation, and her children deserved a decent library. How could she deny them that because of her personal pain? "I'll think about it," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. After she left, Jake remained in the damaged library for a long time, breathing in the smell of wet books and memories. Ms. Davis watched him curiously. "You two really go way back, don't you?" "Yes," Jake replied, his voice hoarse with emotion. "She is the most important woman in my life." That night, Emily barely slept. Lily noticed her agitation but respected her silence. In his luxurious apartment in the Upper East Side, Jake also spent a sleepless night, pacing back and forth, planning how he could win her back. The next morning, Emily found an elegant envelope on her desk at school. Inside, in addition to the official proposal for the library renovation, there was a handwritten note in a handwriting she recognized perfectly. "I know I don't deserve a second chance, but our students deserve this library. Let me do this for them, even if I can't do it for us. Jay." Ms. Davis appeared in the teacher's lounge at that moment, beaming. "Emily, Mr. Sterling called this morning. He wants to start the project immediately, but only if you agree to coordinate. He said he's transferring $2 million to the school's account today, just waiting for your confirmation." "Can you imagine $2 million? That's more than our school has seen in its entire history." Emily looked at the check attached to the proposal, then at the expectant faces of the other teachers who had gathered to hear the amount. How could she deny this gift to her students? How could she allow her past to deprive these children of a better future? With a heavy heart but a clear conscience, Emily agreed to coordinate the project. Over the next 2 weeks, she and Jake were forced to work together, planning every detail of the renovation. The meetings took place in the semi-destroyed library, amidst piles of salvaged books and architectural plans spread out on makeshift tables. At each meeting, Jake arrived punctually, always impeccable in his tailored suits, but Emily noticed how he seemed genuinely interested in every suggestion she made. When she proposed a special corner for storytelling, he not only approved immediately, but suggested adding a small stage. When she mentioned the need for computers for research, he doubled the number initially planned. "Do you remember," Jake said on a particularly warm afternoon as they reviewed the layouts of the bookshelves, "when we spent hours in the NYU library? You always said that one day you would create the perfect reading space." Emily stiffened, pretending to focus on the papers. "That was a long time ago. People change." "Some things don't change," he murmured, watching how she bit her lower lip. When she was concentrated, a habit he had never forgotten. During these weeks, small moments of involuntary intimacy seeped into her resistance. When Jake brought coffee from the local deli instead of sending his driver to get something fancy. When Emily laughed genuinely at a joke he made about the exaggerated proportions that the architect had suggested for the tables. When their hands accidentally touched as they reached for the same document, and both recoiled, as if they had been shocked. Emily's students were fascinated by the presence of the rich man who was renovating their library. Jake, initially uncomfortable, with the children's attention, gradually warmed to the children's direct questions and innocent curiosity. Emily watched him interact with them, seeing glimpses of the passionate and dreamy man she had known in her youth. "Mr. Jake," asked little Lily, 8 years old, "do you have children? Jake paused, something dark passing through his eyes. "No, sweetie, I don't." "Why not? Don't you like kids?" "Yes, I do, very much." His voice was almost inaudible. "But sometimes the choices we make prevent us from having the things we want most." Emily felt something tighten in her chest as she heard the melancholy in his voice. After the children were gone, she couldn't contain her curiosity. "You never got married? Never had a family?" Jake stared at her for a long time before answering. "I was married once, briefly. It was a mistake." "What happened?" He hesitated, running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture she remembered well. "She got pregnant soon after the wedding. I was happy. But 3 months later, I found out it wasn't my child. She had been involved with another man before our wedding and lied to trap me." Jake paused painfully. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal. It was discovering that she only married me for the money. Every "I love you" had been a calculated lie. Emily felt her anger begin to mix with something dangerously close to compassion. "Jake, You know what was the most ironic thing?" he continued, his voice laden with old pain. "Throughout the entire marriage, I called her by your name. She hated it, said it was vulgar, that it didn't suit our social standing. But I couldn't stop, because every night it was you I saw when I closed my eyes." Emily's heart leapt, but she fought against the wave of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "Don't say those things." "Why? Because they're true?" Jake took a step closer, his eyes pleading. "Emily, there hasn't been a single day in all these years that I haven't thought about you. Not a single important decision that I didn't wonder what you would do, what you would say." "Stop, Jake." Her voice was failing. "You don't have the right to say these things to me. Not after... After what? What exactly happened between us?" The question caught her by surprise. There was something in his eyes, a genuine confusion that didn't fit with her painful memories of that last night. But before she could answer, Jake's phone rang. "Sterling Foundation, it's urgent. Problem with the school's documentation. You need to come now." Jake hung up, frustrated. "I have to go, but Emily..." He held her arm gently. "We need to talk. Really talk. About what happened. About everything." She pulled away from his touch, but not before feeling the familiar electricity run through her skin. "There's nothing to talk about." "There is, and you know it." He grabbed his things, but before leaving, he turned to her one last time. "Tomorrow, 7 o'clock at Joe Allen. Please, give me a chance to explain." Alone in the semi-destroyed library, Emily leaned against the wall, her heart pounding erratically. The confusion in his eyes when she mentioned what happened haunted her. Could there be something she didn't know about that terrible night? Some piece of the story that had remained hidden all these years? Emily didn't show up at Joe Allen. The next morning, Jake arrived at the school determined to confront her, but he found a scene of chaos. A contractor's van was parked in front of the gate, and raised voices echoed from the courtyard. "It can't be! You can't stop now!" Ms. Davis's anguished voice reached the street. Jake rushed inside and found Emily arguing with a man in dirty overalls, surrounded by curious students and worried teachers. "Ma'am, it's not our fault," said the contractor, clearly embarrassed. "The order came from above. The project has been cancelled." "Cancelled how?" Jake interjected, his voice cutting. "I didn't cancel any project." The man turned, visibly relieved. "Mr. Sterling, good thing you arrived. We received a call from the Sterling Foundation this morning. Some guy named Edward Sterling said there were problems with the documentation and that the project was suspended indefinitely." Jake's face darkened. "Edward, his half-brother and vice president of the foundation. There's been a misunderstanding. The project is proceeding as normal." But sir, we've already removed all the materials, and Mr. Edward was very clear that I am the president of the foundation, and I'm saying that the project is continuing. Jake's voice echoed through the courtyard, silencing everyone. Emily watched him, noticing the tension in his jaw and the contained anger in his eyes. There was something happening beyond what she could see. After dismissing the contractor with the promise that they would resume work on Monday, Jake turned to Emily. "We need to talk, now." "Jake, what's going on? Why would your brother cancel the project?" He ran his hands over his face, suddenly looking very tired. "Because he found out you're involved." Emily's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "My family, they always knew about you, about us, and apparently Edward has been watching me." Jake looked around, noticing the curious ears. "I can't talk about this here." "Then don't," she replied, turning to leave. "Emily, please, there's something you need to know about the night we broke up." She stopped, her entire body tense. "I don't want to relive that. I received a letter from you that night, a letter saying goodbye to me." Emily turned slowly, confusion etched on her face. "What letter? I never wrote any letter." It was Jake's turn to be confused. "What do you mean? The letter saying that you had met someone else, that our relationship had been a youthful mistake, that you needed to move on?" "Jake, I never wrote that." Her voice was almost a whisper. "I waited for you that night, at our spot, waited until dawn." The world seemed to collapse around Jake. "What spot?" "We had arranged to meet at your apartment. I went there, but your sister said you had left and handed me the letter." "Lily?" Emily felt nausea rising in her stomach. "But I was at Washington Square Park, where we always met when we needed to talk about something important. I sent a message with her telling you to meet me there." They stared at each other in horrified silence, the pieces of a cruel puzzle finally falling into place. 16 years of pain and resentment based on a lie. 16 years of life destroyed by sabotage that was only now coming to light. "Oh my God," Emily whispered, bringing her hands to her mouth. "Lily, why?" Jake felt a cold fury rising in his chest, but it was quickly replaced by despair. "Emily, you need to understand. If I had known, if for a second I had imagined." But the revelation had been too much. Emily ran toward the school gate, leaving Jake alone in the courtyard, surrounded by students and teachers who had witnessed the drama unfold. That night, Jake pounded on the door of Emily's apartment, ignoring the curious neighbors. When Lily opened the door, he stared at her with a controlled fury that made her recoil. "Where is she?" "I don't know what you're talking about." Lily lied, but her hands were shaking. 16 years, Jake said, entering the apartment uninvited. 16 years of our lives you stole? Why? Lily began to cry, but Jake felt no pity. In Emily's room, he found her sitting on the bed, hugging a pillow, her eyes red from crying. "Emily," she confessed, she said without looking at him. "Everything, how she forged the letter, how she lied to you about where I was, how she told me that you had read the letter and walked away laughing, saying I was a romantic fool." Jake sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. Why would she do that? Because she was in love with you, and because... Emily finally looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "Because she was afraid I would abandon her to be with you. Our parents died when she was 15. I was all she had." The magnitude of the tragedy hit them like an avalanche. Their lives destroyed by fear and manipulation. Jake reached out hesitantly, touching Emily's face and wiping away her tears. "We lost so much time," he whispered. "Jake, we can't just pretend these 16 years didn't happen. We're different people now." "But I still love you," he said, his voice breaking. "I still love you as if not a day has passed." Emily closed her eyes at his touch, her entire body trembling. "I've never stopped loving you either, and that's what scares me." Jake moved closer, their foreheads almost touching. Why does that scare you? Because there's so much more at stake now. Your family already tried to separate us once, and now you're Jake Sterling, and I'm just a school teacher from Queens. You were never just anything, he said, kissing her forehead softly. You are everything. When their lips finally met, 16 years of pain, longing, and repressed love exploded between them. The kiss was desperate, hungry, full of tears and unspoken promises. Emily surrendered for a few precious seconds before pulling away, frightened by the intensity of her own feelings. This can't happen, she whispered, but her hand still clutched the lapel of his jacket. Why not? Can't we make up for lost time? Before she could answer, Jake's phone rang insistently. It was Tony, his head of security. Mr. Sterling, we have a problem. There are photographers on the street near the school and your building. Someone leaked information about your frequency at the school and your closeness with a teacher. The press is speculating about a romance. Jake closed his eyes, knowing exactly who had orchestrated it. Edward. Which press? Emily asked, panic growing in her voice. Jake hung up the phone and turned to her, knowing he needed to protect her, but that doing so might mean losing her again. Emily, I need to tell you something about my family, about why Edward cancelled the project. He took a deep breath. They never forgave me for loving you, and now that they know you're back in my life. The sound of cars stopping on the street and reporters' voices echoing from outside made Emily run to the window. Below, cameras and microphones were positioned toward the building. Oh my God, she whispered. They're here. How am I going to get out of here? How am I going to work tomorrow? Jake came up behind her, his hands gently touching her shoulders. I'll fix this, I promise. How? Your family clearly doesn't want me to exist in your life. Then I'll have to choose, he said, turning her to face him, between them and you. And Emily, I've already chosen. Jake's decision to protect Emily publicly had the opposite effect to the one he intended. The next morning, the headlines of the tabloids splashed blurry photos of the two leaving the school together. Tycoon and teacher, forbidden romance, and Jake Sterling abandons elite for love from the past. Social media was buzzing with speculation and cruel comments about Emily. At the school, the situation was untenable. Reporters surrounded the gate, preventing students from entering normally. Concerned parents called, questioning whether it was appropriate for a teacher involved in scandals to continue educating their children. Ms. Davis, although supportive, was under pressure from the Department of Education. Emily, dear, she said in private, maybe it's best if you take a few days of leave until this cools down. Miss Davis, I didn't do anything wrong. I can't be punished for knowing someone from my past. But when Emily saw some students being harassed by reporters outside, she knew that her presence was hurting the children she loved so much. With a broken heart, she accepted the temporary leave. Jake, desperate to minimize the damage, tried to control the narrative through his press office, but Edward had anticipated him. His half-brother had called an emergency meeting of the Sterling Foundation Board, questioning Jake's inappropriate conduct and his leadership ability compromised by personal entanglements. You're embarrassing our family, Edward said before the advisors gathered in the elegant office in Midtown. First with that disastrous marriage, now with this teacher. Investors are nervous. My personal choices don't interfere with my professional abilities, Jake replied, but he could feel the silent disapproval around the table. Don't interfere? Edward smiled coldly. You cancelled 3 important meetings this week to play at renovating some elementary school. You're being photographed in compromising situations. The media is speculating that you're going to squander the family fortune on some love affair. It was then that Edward played his final card. I have here, he said, removing a folder from his briefcase. Documents that show you've been using Foundation resources for personal purposes. The renovations at the school where your friend works are overbilled by 400%. You're diverting charity money to impress a woman. Jake felt his blood run cold. That's a lie. These are the official numbers, Edward replied, distributing copies to the advisors. Of course, I could have misinterpreted the data. Maybe there's an innocent explanation. But if this scandal leaks to the press, the silence in the room was sepulchral. Jake knew that Edward had forged those numbers, but proving it would take time, he didn't have. The implicit threat was clear. Stay away from Emily, or watch your reputation and empire be destroyed in a corruption scandal. What do you want? Jake asked, his voice dangerously low. For you to make the right choice. End this relationship publicly. Marry someone appropriate. Helena Vanderbilt is interested, and the merger with their group would be beneficial. Prove that you're still a sterling worthy of the name. That afternoon, Jake drove to Emily's apartment, his heart heavy. She opened the door with eyes swollen from crying, wearing a simple robe that made her look vulnerable and young. Emily, we need to talk. She let him in but kept her distance. I came to say that you were right, he began, each word hurting like a blade. We're from different worlds. This will never work. Oh. Her voice was small, wounded. So you gave up that? Easily. It's not giving up, it's protecting you. Jake exploded, his mask of control finally slipping. They're going to destroy your life, Emily. They're going to invent scandals. They're going to harass you, your students, your sister. Edward is already planting stories in the media that you're a gold digger after my money. And you believe that? Of course not, but that doesn't matter. The truth doesn't matter when you have enough power and money to create your own truth. Emily approached him, her hands touching his face. Jake, look at me. What did they do? What did they force you to choose? For a moment, he almost broke down, almost told her about the blackmail, about the forged accusations, about how his family was willing to destroy everything he had built to separate them again. But then he imagined Emily being dragged into courtrooms, being publicly humiliated, losing her job and her dignity because of him. They didn't do anything, he lied, pulling her hands away from his face. I just realized that you were right. We're different people now. We have different lives. The pain in Emily's eyes was like a stab in his chest. I understand, she said, her voice taking on that cold, distant tone again. Then go, and this time don't come back. Jake headed for the door, each step an agony. On the threshold, he turned one last time. Emily, Just go, Jake, and take your renovation with you. We've always managed without the Sterlings. Charity. After he left, Emily leaned against the closed door and slid to the floor, sobbing. On the street inside his car, Jake punched the steering wheel in frustration, tears of anger and helplessness streaming down his face. Neither of them noticed the discreet flash of the cell phone camera that had captured Jake leaving the building in apparent haste. Nor did they imagine that that photo, in the right hands, would become the final ammunition to destroy any possibility of reconciliation. Edward smiled as he received the image on his phone. Now he had evidence that Jake had disobeyed family guidelines. It was time for the final blow. The bomb exploded on Monday morning. Emily woke up to insistent knocking on the door and found Lily outside, pale as a ghost, holding a tablet in her trembling hands. Em, you need to see this. The headline of the biggest news website in the country was in bold letters. Sterling. Scandal. Businessman diverts millions from foundation to benefit lover. Below, a grainy but recognizable photo of Jake leaving her building with the caption, Sterling spotted in secret rendezvous after being confronted by family. Emily read with growing horror. The article detailed how Jake supposedly had overbilled school renovations by 400%, diverting $2 million to impress a teacher with whom he maintains an extramarital relationship. There were statements from sources close to the family describing Emily as an opportunist who took advantage of an old flame to get rich. "This can't be happening," she whispered. But worse was to come. The website had obtained her photo from the school's archive and details of her personal life. They described her humble origins and financial difficulties as motivations for the gold-digging scheme. They quoted anonymous neighbors talking about suspicious visits from luxury cars to the building. The phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, curious onlookers, some concerned colleagues. Emily hung up the phone, but knew there was no escape. When she tried to go out to buy bread, she found a small crowd on the sidewalk, some reporters, other gossipy neighbors. "Ms. Carter, is it true that the businessman diverted public money because of you?" shouted a reporter, shoving a microphone in her face. "How much money did you get from him?" asked another. Emily ran back home, followed by cameras and cruel questions. She barricaded herself in the apartment, but the walls seemed to be closing in around her. In the Sterling Foundation's office, Jake faced his own storm. The board had called an emergency meeting, and Edward presided over the table with a victorious smile. "The accusations are serious," said the family lawyer, an elderly man with a stern look. "Misappropriation of funds, improper use of philanthropic resources, conflict of interest. The district attorney has already indicated that he may open an investigation. This is all a setup." Jake slammed his fist on the table. "Edward forged those numbers." "What's your accusations?" Edward retorted calmly. "The documents are all signed by you. Your own secretary confirmed that you personally approved the budgets." Jake realized the trap. Edward had used his trust against him, presenting the documents mixed with other routine contracts. His signature was indeed there. "The solution is simple," Edward continued. "You step down from the foundation temporarily, end any involvement with this woman publicly, and we control the damage. Otherwise," he paused dramatically, "the scandal could extend to other areas of the Sterling business. You could lose much more than the foundation. You're blackmailing me." "We're protecting the family name," corrected the lawyer. "Something you should have thought about before getting involved with unsuitable people." Jake left the meeting knowing he was defeated. Edward had prepared everything meticulously. Even the photo of him leaving Emily's apartment had been taken at the perfect angle to suggest guilt and furtiveness. That afternoon he tried to call Emily several times, but she didn't answer. When he finally managed to speak to Lily, he discovered that Emily had been admitted to the hospital after a panic attack. "She can't stop vomiting," Lily cried on the phone. "She's devastated. The neighbors are saying horrible things. The students at school are asking if she's a thief. She can't take it anymore." Jake rushed to the hospital, but was blocked by security guards. Outside, more reporters waited for statements. One of them shouted, "Mr. Sterling, are you going to publicly acknowledge the relationship with the teacher? Are you going to reimburse the diverted money?" Inside the hospital, Emily was sedated but conscious. When she saw Jake through the glass of the room, she gestured for him to stay away. Even drugged and weak, she didn't want him to risk himself any further for her sake. On his way out of the hospital, Jake was approached by Edward, who had arrived with a team of lawyers. "Do you see what your selfishness has caused? She's hospitalized because of you. Do you really want to destroy her life to satisfy your obsession?" "It's not obsession, it's love." "Love?" Edward laughed bitterly. "What kind of love destroys everything it touches? Look at her, Jake. Look at yourself. You're a ticking time bomb." That night, alone in his empty apartment, Jake received the call that would seal his fate. It was Helena Vanderbilt, the heiress Edward wanted him to court. "Jake, darling, what a complicated situation. But you know you can count on me, don't you? My father has influence in the media. We can make all this disappear quickly. In exchange for what? Oh, you know, an official engagement would be enough to calm things down. It doesn't have to be anything real, just for appearances. At least until the scandal passes. Jake closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the implicit blackmail. Helena was the daughter of the largest media conglomerate in the country. If he refused, they could make Emily's life an even greater hell. I need to think. There's not much time to think, darling. Tomorrow a special article comes out about the gold-digging teacher, with very embarrassing details. But if you announce our engagement before, I can get my father to shelve the article. After hanging up, Jake poured himself a whiskey and looked at the city below. In the flashing lights of the distant apartments, he imagined Emily alone, destroyed, paying the price for having loved him. The next morning, the entire country woke up to news that no one expected. Jake Sterling had officially announced his engagement to Helena Vanderbilt at a press conference. Beside her, impeccable in a designer dress, he declared, "I apologize for the embarrassment caused to my family and those involved in recent speculation. My heart has always belonged to Helena, and we are happy to finally formalize our commitment." Helena smiled radiantly for the cameras, showing off a diamond ring the size of a hazelnut. "Jake and I have known each other for years. This whole little drama was just a misunderstanding amplified by the media." In her apartment in Queens, Emily watched the press conference live, each word of Jake's being like a stab wound. Lily tried to turn off the television, but she stopped her. "Let it be," she said, her voice dead. "I need to hear it." As for PS22, Jake continued, his voice robotic. "The Sterling Foundation will maintain the renovation project, but under new coordination to avoid any further embarrassment." Emily collapsed. It wasn't just the fact that she had lost Jake again. It was the public humiliation, the suggestion that she had been just a misunderstanding, a temporary obstacle in his perfect life with Helena. "He used me," she whispered to Lily, who hugged her as she cried. "He pretended to love me, made me believe that there was an explanation for the past, and then discarded me again, as if I were nothing." What Emily didn't know was that, at that very moment, Jake was locked in the bathroom of the press office, vomiting with disgust at his own words. The ring that Helena displayed was fake, a theatrical agreement to buy time. But the damage to Emily was real and devastating. Edward had won. Once again, he had managed to separate Jake from the woman he loved, using Jake's own goodness as a weapon. Because Jake knew that, if he continued fighting, it would be Emily who would pay the highest price. What neither of them imagined was that Lily, consumed by the guilt of having caused their first separation 16 years ago, was secretly recording all the phone conversations between Edward and his allies, determined to uncover the truth and repair the harm she had done. 3 weeks had passed since the engagement announcement. Emily had become a recluse, refusing to leave the apartment while the media storm gradually calmed down. Her leave from school had become indefinite after pressure from parents, and she had lost some private students whose families didn't want to be associated with the Sterling scandal. Lily watched her sister wither, consumed by the guilt that had been gnawing at her for 16 years. Emily spent her days in bed, barely eating, ignoring attempts at consolation. It was like watching someone slowly die of heartbreak. "I can't anymore," Lily muttered to herself one Saturday morning, seeing Emily refuse another cup of tea. "I can't let this happen again." That day, while Emily slept, Lily made a decision that would change everything. She took the bus to the Upper East Side and headed to the Sterling Foundation building. She knew it was unlikely she would be able to speak to Jake, but she needed to try. To her surprise, it was Edward who received her in the luxurious office on the 15th floor. "The teacher's sister," he said with a condescending smile. "How unexpected. I want to talk to Jake. My brother is busy planning his wedding, but can I help you with something? Perhaps a sum of money to help you move out of the city. It would be for the best for everyone." Lily stared at him with courage she didn't know she possessed. "I know what you did. I heard you on the phone with that lawyer about the forged documents." Edward's smile wavered slightly. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You manipulated the foundation's numbers, made it look like Jake was diverting money." Lily pulled her cell phone from her pocket. "I have recordings." Edward stood up abruptly, his face hardening. "Be careful with your accusations, miss. You're playing with fire. Like you played with our lives 16 years ago." The confession escaped before Edward could control himself. "Ah, so you know. I know you paid a private investigator to find out everything about our family after Jake started dating my sister in college. I know you found out about our parents' death, about how I depended on her. And I know you offered me money to separate them." Edward laughed coldly. "And you accepted like a good little gold digger. I was 17 years old. I was terrified of the idea of being alone in the world. You manipulated me." Lily's tears finally came. "You convinced me that Jake was going to take my sister away, that she was going to abandon me, that it was better for everyone if they broke up. And wasn't I right? Look where they got when they reunited. Total destruction. Because you orchestrated everything again," Lily screamed. "The photos, the forged documents, the pressure on her school." At that moment, the office. Doctor opened and Jake entered, stopping when he saw Lily in tears before his brother. "What's going on here?" Edward recovered quickly. "Nothing much. The young lady was just visiting." But Lily turned to Jake, desperate. "He forged everything. The documents, the foundation's numbers, and 16 years ago, he was the one who paid me to separate you." Jake felt the world spin. "What?" "I wrote the fake letter," Lily sobbed. "Edward paid me $5,000, a fortune to me at the time. He said that Emily would be much better off without you, that you were only going to hurt her. I was young and selfish and I destroyed my sister's life." The silence in the office was deadly. Jake looked at Edward, who had lost all pretense of innocence. "I always protected you," Edward said coldly, "from that family of hustlers. You should be thanking me." Jake advanced towards his brother, fists clenched, but Lily stepped between them. "No, violence won't solve anything." She took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. "I have the recordings of his conversations plotting against you. I have proof of everything." "What recordings?" Edward tried to maintain his composure, but the panic was visible. Lily showed the app on her phone. "Every conversation you had with the lawyer about the fake documents, every call to the journalists planting stories about my sister, every instruction on how to destroy her reputation." Jake took the phone, listening to a few seconds of the recording. Edward's voice was clear. "I need you to invent something about the teacher, dubious past, anything that completely demoralizes her." "Lily," Jake said, his voice choked with emotion, "why are you doing this? Why are you helping me now?" "Because I destroyed my sister's first true love out of fear and selfishness. I'm not going to let them destroy her second out of greed and malice." She stared at Edward with determination. "And because Emily has been wanting to die for 3 weeks because of the lies you spread." Jake felt his heart shatter. "How is she?" "Destroyed, humiliated, convinced that you used her and discarded her again." Lily turned to him, pleading. "But now you have a way to prove the truth. You have a way to clear her name." Edward stood up, trying to maintain some control of the situation. "Even if you have these supposed recordings, who's going to believe the word of a family of gossips against a Sterling?" Jake smiled for the first time in weeks, but it was a dangerous smile. "You forgot one thing, Edward. I'm still the president of this foundation, and I have my own allies in the media." He picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Tony, Jake Sterling. Call a press conference for tomorrow at 10 in the morning. And Tony, I want all the media there, all of them." Edward paled. "Jake, you can't be thinking of—" "I'm thinking of telling the truth, the whole truth." Jake headed for the door, but stopped and looked back. "And Edward, you have until tomorrow morning to prepare your defense, because I'm going to expose every lie, every manipulation, every crime you committed against us." After Jake left, Lily stared at Edward one last time. 16 years ago, you convinced me that you were protecting my sister. Now I know you were just protecting your own power, but not this time. As she went down in the elevator, Lily knew that she had just declared war on the most powerful family in New York. But she also knew that it was time to fight for the happiness of the sister who had sacrificed too much for her. The press conference was scheduled for the grand ballroom of the Plaza, and Jake deliberately chose the most prestigious location possible for his statement. At 9:50 in the morning, the ballroom was packed with journalists from all the major news outlets in the country, curious business people, and in the back, Edward Sterling with a team of lawyers, visibly nervous. Emily watched from home, still weak, but Lily had insisted that she needed to see it. "He's going to fight for you, Em, the way he should have fought 16 years ago." Jake stepped up to the podium wearing his best suit, but there was something different about his posture, a determination that transcended his usual business elegance. Helena Vanderbilt was conspicuously absent, and the reporters murmured speculation about the reason. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," Jake began, his firm voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "I have called this press conference to definitively clarify the events of the past few months and to make some important revelations about the Sterling Foundation and my family." He paused, his eyes meeting Edward's in the back of the ballroom. "First, I want to address the accusations of misappropriation of funds from the foundation. These accusations are not only false, but criminally fabricated." Jake nodded to Tony, who distributed folders to all the journalists. "You will find there the complete recordings provided by a courageous source that document how my half-brother Edward Sterling forged documents, manipulated numbers, and planted false stories in the media to blackmail me." The murmur in the ballroom intensified. Edward tried to get up, but the flashes of the cameras prevented him from leaving discreetly. "More importantly," Jake continued, his voice gaining emotional intensity, "I want to talk about Emily Carter, an extraordinary teacher who has been brutally defamed and humiliated by my family in recent months." In her apartment in Queens, Emily held Lily's hand, her heart pounding. "Emily Carter is not an opportunist. She is the woman I have loved for over 20 years. She is the woman from whom I was separated at 22 through lies and manipulations, orchestrated by my own family. She is the woman who built a dignified and inspiring life dedicated to the education of underprivileged children, while I built an empty empire." Jake took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would change his life forever. "For 16 years, I believed that she had rejected me through a farewell letter. I recently discovered that that letter was forged by someone who paid her younger sister than a vulnerable teenager to separate us. During all those years, Emily believed that I had abandoned her voluntarily." The ballroom was in absolute silence. Some reporters typed frantically, others held their cell phones recording every word. "When we met again 2 months ago, I tried to win her back, but my family, led by Edward Sterling, orchestrated a systematic campaign of defamation against her. They forged documents to blackmail me, planted false stories in the media, and turned an honest woman into the villain of an invented scandal." Jake paused, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "I made the mistake of trying to protect her by yielding to blackmail, announcing a fake engagement to divert the pressure on her. But I realized that by doing so, I abandoned her a second time. And that, I can't forgive myself. He turned directly to one of the main cameras. Emily, if you're watching, I ask you to forgive me. Not for trying to protect you, but for not being brave enough to fight for us from the very beginning. For letting the fear of hurting you prevent me from choosing you. Edward tried to hide behind the lawyers as the flashes blinded him, and reporters shouted questions about the recordings. As of today, Jake announced, Edward Sterling is dismissed from all positions in the family companies, and the Sterling Foundation is being restructured with total transparency. The PS22 project will be completed as originally planned under the coordination of Ms. Emily Carter, if she accepts. Jake paused one last time before the final blow. And as for my engagement to Helena Vanderbilt, it is officially cancelled. It was a temporary agreement to protect someone I love, but I can no longer live a lie. The ballroom exploded in shouted questions, but Jake raised his hand for silence. I have one last thing to say. Emily Carter is the most honest, generous, and courageous woman I know. She has dedicated her life to educating children that society has forgotten. She has transformed a simple library into a sanctuary of hope for an entire community. If that doesn't make her worthy of any man's love, including mine, then I don't know what does. His voice choked on the last sentence. Emily, I love you. I always have. I always will. And if you give me one last chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving that you deserve all the love in the world. Jake left the podium without answering the questions that rained down on him. In her apartment in Queens, Emily cried convulsively in Lily's arms, who also cried, begging for forgiveness repeatedly. He fought for me, Emily whispered between sobs. In front of the whole world, he fought for me. Half an hour later, Jake was at their door, still wearing the suit from the press conference, but with red and vulnerable eyes. Emily opened the door, and they stared at each other in silence for long seconds. You destroyed your life because of me, she said finally. No, Jake replied, reaching out to touch her face. I saved my life by choosing you. When she threw herself into his arms, 16 years of pain and separation finally came to an end. They kissed with the intensity of those who had lost everything and recovered what really mattered. Around them, the world might be in chaos, but at that moment they were complete. Edward would face lawsuits for fraud and defamation. Helena would discover that there was a difference between buying a man and winning his heart. And the Sterling Foundation, under new management, would become one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the country. But none of that mattered to Jake and Emily, who spent the entire afternoon talking, kissing, and rediscovering the love that had survived 2 decades of separation, lies, and manipulation. 6 months later, in the garden of the house they bought together in Westchester, overlooking the Long Island Sound, Jake Sterling knelt before Emily Carter with a simple, solitaire diamond ring. This time, he said, his eyes shining, nothing and no one will separate us. This time, she replied, pulling him into a kiss, I believe in us. The PS22 library became the most modern in the borough, and Emily continued to be a teacher by choice, not by necessity. Jake discovered that true wealth was not in his business empire, but in coming home every night to the arms of the woman he had waited a lifetime to love completely. And when Lily, finally forgiven and in therapy to deal with her guilt, visited them on Sundays for family lunches, the three knew that some wounds from the past become the most solid foundations for the future. Love had won, not because it was easy, but because it was true. And some truths, no matter how long they take to come to light, always find their way home.